everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, March 13th, 2023, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And of course, you didn't hear from me last week because I was out of the country. I was visiting Jordan along with a group of students and professors and postdocs from the university where I am completing my internship in clinical psychology. We visited Jordan in order to offer some psychological assessment and intervention to mostly young children, Palestinian refugees who are living in various parts of the country. It was a really incredible experience. I learned a lot, and it was just wonderful to spend time with the Jordanian people, to eat their incredible food, to go to some incredible places, and to just learn a lot from the kids there as well. You can probably hear in my voice that I'm sick. I was not sick the whole trip, thank goodness, and I really got to just kind of experience the depths of the culture. But of course, I think I was exposed on the plane ride home, and I am but a mere mortal. I have finally done it and tested positive for COVID-19. 3 years late, right? So I know it started circulating in the US in March of 2020, and now I've tested positive in March of 2023. I took Paxlovid right away. I'm hoping to be on the mend pretty quickly, but I needed to get this recording up. So I'm doing it with a stuffy nose and a little bit of a sore throat. So bear with me. And thanks for sticking it out with me throughout everything. Y'all are the best. Like, I just love the listeners of the show. And I want to give you props. I want to give you a shout out, especially to those of you who continue to support the show financially and make it possible for me to keep making this thing. So this week's top patrons include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, Ulrika Hagman, and so many more. Thank you all so much. Thank you. All right, let's get into this week's episode. So I had the opportunity, I'm going to try and pronounce her name appropriately, correctly. I'm so sorry if I butcher it, but with science writer, journalist, Susanne Wedlich. She was educated in Munich, studied biology and political science, but she has been a freelance science writer for years and written for so many incredible outlets, including Der Spiegel, National Geographic, and a lot of others. She's got a new book out, and it's fascinating. It's called Slime, A Natural History. When's the last time you thought about slime? Well, we're going to be talking a lot about it today. So without any further ado, here she is, Susanne Wedlich. Well, Susanne, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me on your show.
So, as we were just discussing offline, we are both sick, so that's fun. Luckily, we're not in person, so we can't catch each other's sicknesses. You think you just have a cold?
Yeah, I'm almost over it, but you know how it is. That slimy stuff. Yeah, it takes a while.
Oh, yeah. They definitely linger. And I want to say 2 days ago, started to feel cold-like symptoms, thought it was nothing, took a COVID test, womp womp. I've made it basically 3 years. This is my first time catching COVID. So I am but a mere mortal after all, sadly. So bear with us, listeners, as we are both a little bit under the weather, which is maybe a bit apropos, as you mentioned, because we're going to be talking about slime, all that good slimy stuff. So maybe before we dive into your new book, Slime, A Natural History, you can tell me a little bit about, what got you into science writing. And really, you studied biology academically. What kind of first sparked your passion in the sciences?
I think that I really always wanted to be a biologist, like that the classical stuff that gets you going, just animals, observing them in the garden, things like that. So in a sense, studying biology was a no-brainer for me, but I just really hated the lab work. So focusing on a tiny detail for a decade is something I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it. And I thought it was much cooler, to have other people do the hard stuff, do the science, find out interesting things, and then me just taking that and writing about it, and the next day do something else. So I never. There was no temptation for me to do a PhD because I couldn't have done it. 3 years in a lab, no. No
I
way.
love it. And I think that there's such an important space for individuals like science writers, science communicators to take what's happening in the lab, to take what's happening in the academic literature and translate it, because there still really does feel like a very thick wall between academia and public perception. And sadly, when not all, I should say not all, because there are a lot of general assignment reporters and journalists who do a brilliant job of reporting science, but it is a niche and it requires some expertise. And sadly, some things get lost in translation when we don't have expert journalists who know how to report on science.
Absolutely. And I actually think it's not a niche anymore, because if you think about it, I mean, I write a lot about climate, for example, but I didn't start out as a climate reporter. It's just whatever you do, if you write about biology, you end up doing climate as well. But the same goes for, let's say, people writing on economics, or whatever your field is, you will have to write about climate in the end, even if you cover the arts and literature. Of course, now authors are picking up those stories, all those dystopias and the apocalypse. What will it look like? How will we survive? So wherever you start, I think we all end up doing, in the end, at least some sort of science writing.
And even if your specialty is in some sort of specific area of science, and especially natural history, I don't know how anybody can get away from, as you mentioned, writing about the climate and about the kind of the nature of our reality changing quite drastically. It's almost impossible to write about scientific endeavors without writing about where we are today and where we're potentially going.
Absolutely. I mean, when I picked slime as a subject, I thought this is like the most absurd and niche topic that's out there, right? I mean, I'm a biologist and I had never thought about slime before. I never even thought it could be something to write about, like a real material. Is there even a story there? And then 3 years later, of course, I ended up with a mountain of material. And it took me so long to realize that slime is everywhere and it's so important. And yes, there's a lot of climate in there.
And so is Slime your first full-length book?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's the
okay.
first.
And so I'm curious because you've been a science writer, science journalist, science reporter, and covered so many different things for so many years for a lot of different outlets. Was this born out of coverage that you did, or how did you actually say, okay, yeah, it's going to be slime?
Not at all. I mean, it was, how our journalists are. That you read something interesting, for example, and back then, 20 years ago, it was in print, still in print.
Right.
And then you rip out the article, and think, okay, I'll have a look. Maybe there's something more to it. And that was the same with slime. There was an article, or I think it was even a dossier, like three pieces on slime in the New Scientist magazine. And one of them was on snail trails. And I didn't know back then, of course, I would end up writing a book on the stuff, but I thought this is just so fascinating because it seems that snails communicate via their trails. So their messages are hidden in the slime. They can read each other's other trails, which means that males find their females because they can read from the slime, first of all, who went there, what species, is it my species? And then is it a female? Is she attractive? Attractive means apparently she's well-rounded, leaves a broad trail and no parasites. That's important. And then even the direction. And no one really knows how they do that. I mean, in the slime, how can you put a message down? I went left, don't go right. That's amazing. That's complex. And I thought that there must be more to this, to slime, because yeah, it was just so unlikely that only snails had invented fascinating slime and all the other slimes are boring. It's just, I thought it was so unlikely. But then, yeah, I kept the article and from time to time I did some research, but I didn't know back then that it's not enough just to Google slime. Because if you go just for slime, you will maybe find snails or the hagfish, but nothing else because biological slimes have different names depending on who produces them.
Right, because slime itself is sort of, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I always kind of thought of it as a colloquialism, like it's a broad word that's not necessarily a technical term, is it?
Exactly. First of all, there's no real definition. And I talked to a microbiologist who studies, he's retired now, but he worked on microbial slimes, and he said that slime is not a material per se; it's more like a property that materials can have, which of course makes it even harder to find out what biological slime really is, because you have there can be a slime that's just a product of decay. Like a fruit that's rotting, it doesn't go from solid to liquid in one step. There's a slimy phase in between. That's a slime, but that just means that there's more and more disorder. That's not a slime that does anything. It just happens because the tissue and the cells break open. And that's, of course, there's no pure water in there. It's just water that's bound. Or you have, all those play slimes now that kids and teenagers concoct themselves. And they're fun, of course, but still they don't do anything. In a biological sense, they're boring. Right. So it took me a while just to separate those different slimes and to focus really only on biological slimes. That means slimes that a life form, any life form, a microbe, a plant, animal, a human produce, and a slime that fulfills at least one function. And that's the complex stuff. But it looks the same on from the outside, right? It doesn't look like a complex thing. But yeah, they're rather sophisticated, actually.
And so, even kind of taking a step back before we narrow in specifically on biological slimes, which is what you covered in your book, you mentioned, like the slimes that kids make out of white glue and some sort of reactant, or you mentioned, the decay of a fruit turning into this slimy like substance as it breaks down. What is it fundamentally about? Because it's kind of like that famous definition of pornography here in the States. Like, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. Yeah. Like, what is it that makes something slime?
Yeah. I can quote the same microbiologist again. His name is Hans-Kurt Fleming, and he said slime is basically stiff water.
Stiff water.
Yeah, it's wow. Just stiff water. It means it's all those slimes, or at least the biological ones, are at least 95% water, and that water is bound in let's say a molecular network, like a scaffold. And the water, of course, wants to run, but it's bound in a way that gives that specific sliminess. And yeah, we know it when we see it, when we feel it, sometimes even when we hear it. And I think that this is why slime, that important substance, has been hidden for so long, because, of course, it's disgusting. and and why is it disgusting? I mean, I only have my own theories here. I mean, disgust, of course, is like a fundamental emotion that's supposed to keep us away from pathogens and parasites. But how do you do that? If microbes are called microbes because they're microscopically small. We can't see them. So how is our disgust system supposed to be triggered? By something that, like coronaviruses. Is a coronavirus? Is it here or not? You can't see it. And I think that this is why we react to, let's say, phenomena that are often associated with microbes and microbial contamination, like a stench.
Like smells. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Or slime. And this is why, and I mean, of course, slimes are actually often contaminated because microbes build perfect slimes themselves. And then our slimes, like a runny nose, when you have a cold, it's full of pathogens, obviously. So it's dangerous. You shouldn't allow anyone to sneeze on you. Everyone knows that. And there's also, I think, that central quality that slime has. It's so easy to recognize. And our disgust system only works if it's fast and if it's strong. You're not supposed, to touch a slime and think about it at length. Is it dangerous or not? You're supposed to jump back and not touch it or not eat anything that's suspicious. And I think that's why somehow slime is in the crosshairs of our disgust system. It's so perfect as a trigger.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. It reminds me of, there are certain factors that have very strong odors, molecules, right? That smell of rot or of death that very easily trigger us, our disgust reaction, and they're like almost universal. And it reminds me almost, okay, bear with me because this is kind of a weird analogy and this might just be my sick and medicated brain talking, but I remember talking to a computer scientist once about the concept of the uncanny valley, when there are characters that are not quite human and not quite robotic, and they're sort of in that in-between state, and they make us feel really uncomfortable. They tend to almost trigger a disgust reaction. And I remember this person said that the prevailing theory right now, and of course it is just kind of a hypothesis, is that it reminds us of death. That when we see characters in the uncanny valley, they don't quite feel like they're alive. And that makes us feel, it makes us repel from them because being around death is a trigger to us evolutionarily that there's danger afoot, right? Like maybe we would be sick if we're around a dead body. And so I can imagine that the slimes that different organisms put off, it's so deep in our evolutionary kind of conscience or consciousnness that, if something is slimy, it's dangerous. It's going to make me sick. It's going to potentially kill me. I should stay away.
Yes and no, I think. This is one of my favorite rabbit holes, so you have to stop me.
Yes, please. I love a good rabbit hole. Oh, wonderful.
Okay. The thing is that, slime is so hard to characterize, right? And it's somehow between solid and liquid, and maybe we come to that later. Biological slimes even can switch the properties. It can become more solid or more liquid just as needed. So they're really, in every sense of the word, hard to grasp. And that's, for us, I think that's something that we find hard to deal with. Something that you can't categorize or define easily.
And of course, I'm sitting here trying to define it like a non-Newtonian fluid. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. But if you go back, let's say to Darwin's times, or Ernst Haeckel, like the German evolutionary biologist, contemporary and the champion of Darwin. And he tried to come up with an explanation of where life came from. So without God, according to evolutionary theory, you have to have another idea, where did life come from? And so he thought that slime actually would be the source of all life because it's somehow between dead matter and life. And this means to me that if you look at what those people were writing, or even then later on, even decades later in literature, so often you find slime as have that kind of promise, something that can become more. And nowadays, of course, we look at a slime and it's more like, is it only oozing or is it alive already? All our monsters, all our aliens in pop culture, they have to be slimy.
Right.
And I think that just switch that ambivalence, you can see the potential and the promise, or you can be grossed out and it's just, it makes you suspicious. And that's my very own personal theory that, let's say in industrialized countries where we have outsourced our slimes, in a sense, we have sanitation and hospitals and things like that. A slime is something that we should be confronted with every day because it's just a basic biomaterial of our very own bodies, animals, everything. But we don't have garbage rotting in the streets anymore. We don't really care for the sick in the family. I think that we just see sometimes, of course, slime for us means sex, disease, and death. But often in a very abstract way. And like I said, our disgust, once just strong reactions, very fast and strong reactions. It can't be too strong. And usually life will put a damper on this. So if disgust had its way, we wouldn't have sex anymore. But that's a problem for humanity. And we wouldn't eat anymore. I mean, every single bite could be your last bite, right?
Right.
So if the need is big enough, of course, we will have sex, we will eat, we will get close to other people. But what happens if slime isn't like something that we have to confront every day? And I think that our disgust is now just freewheeling in a sense, and that's a luxury. And actually, I think 2 years ago or so, there was a fascinating study that American scientists did in the Amazon region with communities who lived there, the Shuar, some of whom are still completely remote and self-sustained. So they're like 2 hours away from everything that we might call civilization. So they don't have anything like a fridge, obviously, or a kitchen. There's no hygiene. They live with the animals. So there's blood, excretions, everything. And the only water they have is the dirty river water. And these people aren't easily disgusted because they can't afford to be.
Right.
And then they did the same type of study with Shuar, who had moved to some, I don't know, a village or small towns where they have supermarkets, stuff like that. And they are disgusted much more easily. That means, obviously, we need disgust, but it always will adjust to how we live. And if you can't afford to be disgusted, then you aren't disgusted. I mean, there's no choice, right? You will not starve if there's some moldy, maggoty piece of meat. When it comes down to that. So that was another thing. I mean, that's just like a sideshow, the cultural history of slime. But
it's fascinating, though.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Someone else should tackle this. I mean, I thought that the whole story of biological slimes, it was so new. I haven't found another book on this, neither in German nor in English. And there's so much to tell that I thought, I have to just limit the story and that whole cultural thing. It's a sideshow. Of course, I mention it, and of course, I explain how disgust work and things like that. But there's so much more meat to those bones.
Right. It's. I wonder if sort of this side conversation that we're having doesn't help explain. And again, we will get to the biological slime, I promise. But this new phenomenon of, as you mentioned before, kids who are like obsessed with playing with slime. That it's sort of, there's something about getting right up to the line with disgust, or taking disgust and turning it on its ear, which, as you mentioned, we do all the time with sex. Like, it's like just on the other side of disgust is very sexy.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with kids is, and that's another fascinating facet of disgust, that we're all born with the ability to be disgusted, but we only learn as kids what we are supposed to be triggered by,
Right.
And that makes a lot of sense, because risks change. And there's always a new danger or another danger. So that means that kids, you can't really discuss kids, right? I mean, every baby will happily play with the full diaper.
Right.
No problem at all. Even the smell.
Right.
So for us, it's so ingrained to be disgusted by that stuff, the smell, the slime, that we think we must be born with it. But if you think about it, kids aren't disgusted by that. And it's probably easier to learn to be disgusted by slime or slimy worms than by a fluffy kitten. But still, we are not born with an aversion to slime. That happens later. And that's, of course, why kids, first of all, love it. I mean, it's such essential material, slime. And then adults are grossed out. And that's, I think, really attractive.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned before that the sort of first article, the first piece that you came across when it came to biological slime, or at least the one that caught your eye, was about snail slime. And it makes sense, right? You mentioned, if you Google it, if you think about slime, I think snail slugs and as you said, hagfish are sort of the first things that come to mind. Why do you think that is? Is it because their slime is like definitional? It's like quintessential slime?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's just, if you were a researcher and wanted to find out how slime works, what would you do? You would start with snails, right?
Right.
Either human mucus or snails. And then you mentioned the hagfish. I mean, of course, they're interesting for researchers because their slime is so unique. It's so different from other slimes. But then I think you either go for microbes or for snails. Why choose another rare species? Or I mean, many slimes you can't even see, because as stiff water, of course, it's a problem if you have if you carry your slimes on the outside, if you're terrestrial. That's why our mucuses, all our slimes are on the inside. They're different slimes, and they're really important and they're cool, but we just don't get to see them. But snails, they've managed somehow to keep the slime on the outside, so it's easy to research. And it has to be said that slime as stiff water, with that very, let's say, fragile molecular structure, it's just really hard to research. And I think that only now do we have the methods that we can get a detailed picture of for our mucus, for example. It's just really hard. If you open up a body and then the mucus will dry out immediately.
Ah,
right?
so the reason it's hard to research is because it's not very stable as a structure.
Exactly. It's not so stable. And then there were just different lines of work. I think you have the whole microbiome research and, of course, genetics. I mean, if there were some really fascinating studies on slime in, I think, the 80s, maybe the 90s. And then everything dried out, basically. And now we're coming back to this. I mean, when I researched the book, maybe 5 years ago or so, I was so happy to get maybe a review, just some big picture study. And nowadays, it's just too much to keep up. I thought I would read everything that would come out on slime, at least important pieces, and that's impossible now. It's exploding everywhere, but I'm not sure that people notice because, as I said, it's not always on the headline slime. There might be a different name, but it's still a slime is in there.
Why do you think it's exploding everywhere now? Why this interest?
I think all those, let's call it slime fields, are exploding right now because, first of all, we have the methods now to really analyze the different slimes. And that's has to do with that the scaffold has a lot to do with sugar chains. And sugars are like the last building block of life that hasn't really been studied yet because we lack the methods, and we have that now. And another thing is that biological slimes belong to a group of materials called hydrogels. And
okay,
they've been studied before, obviously, and they're now like a huge thing where everyone tries to, let's say, come up with new hydrogels to help regeneration in the body, because those hydrogels are a bit like our connective tissue, and we need that stuff for wounds to close or maybe even regrow some tissues, things like that. There are other researchers who study animal slimes that are glues, much better glues than our conventional synthetic glues, and they try to imitate those. There are all these different areas where researchers are diving in right now, or have the methods now to work on the slime. So that's fascinating to see. But yeah, I can't keep up, to be honest.
Do you think, I mean, obviously slime is hard water. Slime is something that we know when we see it. Is there, and you mentioned kind of this molecular structure of the sugars. Is there anything fundamental that mucosal slime in a body, external slime in a snail, different biological slimes across microbes or fungus or animals or plants? Is there anything fundamental to all of those? Or is it more, like you mentioned before, that it's a property of molecules and it's a description more than it is an actual quantity, an actual object?
No, it seems that they're really all hydrogels or similar to hydrogels.
Okay.
So that inner structure of a lot of water that it is bound in a molecular structure is is basically the same. I mean, it's hard to tell really, because very often I see maybe a publication where they talk about an animal with a sticky secretion. I mean, is that a slime like that? But in a sense, why wouldn't it? I mean, everyone produces slimes, everyone uses slimes, and the ones that we know are so similar, even from microbes to humans. And they fulfill the same functions, like lubrication, like as a glue, or of course, like the mucus in our body, like a very selective barrier. So it's entirely possible that some life forms came up with entirely new ideas of materials that look like slime and behave like slime and fulfill the same functions. But I mean, it's just hard to imagine. Why would they do that? I mean, the same. I can't say with certainty that there is the slimeless organism out there. But it would just be fascinating to see that animal or whatever it is, because I'm pretty sure it must have been like an evolutionary decision to block slime production. Why would it do that? In the end, it's a cheap material that's so versatile. That can do so many things. Why would you live without it if you have a chance to use it?
Well, let's talk about those things. What does it do? You know, it's versatile, it's practical, but what purposes, does slime serve?
Yeah. I mean, I focused on lubrication, the glues and the barriers. And very often you have slimes that do more than one thing at the same time. And you mentioned already the non-Newtonian fluids, and that's what these hydrogels are. That means, for example, I mean, it's really the simple things that show best how fascinating these slimes are. If you look at snail trails, how does a snail crawl on slime? There was this great publication by Mark Denny, I think in the 80s, who said it best. How does an animal with 1 foot crawl on chewing gum? And it works like that. If you take a snail and let it crawl over a glass plate and watch from underneath, from the other side, you will see that there are it's a pattern like dark stripes that move along the sole of the snail. But these are really muscle contractions that bulge out and they push on the slime. And they push so hard that on that particular spot, only where that one or every single one contraction is, the inner scaffold will break down. That means the slime becomes more liquid only on those particular spots. That means the snail can glide over that spot. Once the wave has passed, the contraction has passed, the slime will harden out again, and then the snail can push off. Just as simple as a garden slug. The most basic garden slug on the most basic snail trail can do these amazing things. The slime that breaks down and immediately regenerates. And that's the lubrication, of course. But then those same slugs can stick to wherever they want, on a wall or even to the ground if there's an attack, maybe a bird trying to pick it off. Those slimes can be so sticky that the bird is incapable of just pulling the snail off. And the same goes for many, many marine creatures. You have those snails and sea stars and mussels and all these animals. They can stick to the ground in the water. And this is something, of course, that our synthetic glues often can't do. If you have a Band-Aid and you take a shower, it will probably fall off. And our glues often are toxic, which means that we live in a glue-filled world. The furniture, hardwood floors, often our shoes, books, they're all glued, and often those glues are the reason why we can't recycle that stuff. So it would be just amazing if you could replicate or somehow imitate those animal glues. It could be like really novel applications, like closing wounds after surgery. It would be so much more elegant to glue them shut instead of stapling them or whatever it is that surgeons do. Things like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh gosh. So there really is so much active research happening right now on how to use this biological material in a sort of biomedical or industrial way.
Exactly. And that's, of course, one area where this becomes a question of the climate crisis, because all those, let's just say, marine animals rely on their slimes, different slimes. You have the common limpet. We all know them. If you have a rocky coast, they don't look like much, but it's impossible to pry them off. If they stick to a rock somewhere, you need basically tools, real tools to get them off. And they only stick because the slime is so strong. And then you have maybe on the other hand sea stars with their hundreds of feet, and they leave with every single step, they will leave a dot of slime, and that's like, it's more like a Post-it. It's a weak slime. It sticks, but not like the limpet glue. And we could use all those slimes. But what happens now, if, of course, the water becomes warmer, it becomes more acidic. And all these slimes are really sensitive to the environment. So it's entirely possible that some of these slimes, maybe, let's say, they weaken. Then a limpet wants to stay put because the waves are so strong. And then the glue isn't strong enough. That's a huge problem. Or the glues could become more sticky. Then that means it's just too costly to pry your body off. It's just, it costs too much energy to get rid of the slime. That's always another problem. And we just have no idea how that works. And these slimes are so sensitive. I mean, my favorite example is actually the human body, but it just means that we know a lot of about our own mucus, obviously, because we study them more than other mucuses. But there's one example that I just love. In the female genital tract, the body has a problem because sperm have to be able to move in there, right? But you want to keep passages out. This would be like an open door to all kinds of parasites and pathogens. So what do you do? Obviously, you put a really strong mucus barrier right at the entrance, the cervix. And usually it's closed off, just really thick and strong, and basically no one is supposed to get through. But how do you handle the sperm problem? Only during the fertile days of each monthly cycle. That barrier will weaken and become more liquid so that a sperm can move through, but only fit sperm. So the barrier function is still intact. I mean, it's some sort of risk. Obviously, pathogens could use that opportunity. But yeah, you have to be open sometime, right? But only during time when there's actually an egg cell that could be, that's fertile. And then it will close off again. And while it's open, it will still filter out all those defective sperms, ones that are strong swimmers. So, and we're still talking about stiff water. And, and the body controls that and regulates that only by changing the pH in the environment, making that really strong and thick barrier much more open and thinner. So what happens if the sea becomes more acidic? That's obviously a different pH, but still, these slimes are really, really sensitive, and no one knows what will happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a scary prospect how these downstream. I mean, you're right. It's almost impossible to model. I know people try to. They absolutely try to, but I've never even heard, we talk about decalcification of organisms in the ocean because of rising acidity. We talk about sea rise and the effect of that, changes in salinity, but I don't think I've ever heard a conversation about changes to slime.
No, not at all. I mean, I haven't really found anyone who, back when I was researching the book, I think there are more studies now, but it's so complex because, like you said, I mean, it's rather simple to understand that if you're an animal with like a snail with a shell, and the water becomes more acidic, obviously that's a problem. For all those calcareous structures. But the slime, on the other hand, very often in the sea, it's produced by microbes, and microbes like it warm. So it's entirely possible that they will produce more slime, and that slime might be more sticky or less sticky. But that same sticky slime is the one, for example, that glues organic particles in the sea together so that they sink and we get all that carbon storage in the deep sea. So that could be major, major effects. Or another slime, I think that hardly anyone is aware of, is like a microbial biofilm, a slime that covers the sea, at least in large parts. And it's like a skin. It's like a slimy skin of the sea. And obviously that's, you can't see it, but it's there. And it's a major interface between the atmosphere and the sea. That means all that oxygen that's being produced in the sea has to pass through. Every single molecule has to go through that slime. And all those CO2 molecules from the atmosphere that the sea takes up have to pass through that slime. So let's say as the seawater gets warmer, the microbes on the surface are really happy, produce more slime, that interface will thicken. What will happen? No one really knows. I mean, there are theories that say those exchanges will slow down or they might even speed up. No one really knows, but we're talking about an interface covering more or less 2/3 of the planet.
Wow. I mean, it's a little bit unfathomable. How did you grapple with that when you were, sitting down to write about this? I mean, these are big, big, big topics that are almost ungrappleable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a wild ride because when I started out, I just had the snails. And I thought maybe if I'm lucky, I will find a few more, funny slime animals and then write one of those funny science books, like a small thing, just a few pages. And then while researching the thing, it's very often was just I have one anecdote and it's like a thread that you pull and then, a whole avalanche of material comes after that. And in the end, it was so much material that I didn't know how to structure the whole thing because, I mean, slime probably has always been there, maybe even from the first microbial cells on Earth.
Right, so billions of years.
Yeah, absolutely billions. And every single life form on Earth probably produces it and uses it and needs it. And maybe even aliens. I mean, slime is like a big topic in astrobiology. What would an alien look like? It's probably
and
slimy.
Also, of course, in sci-fi.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that every single disease that we have, cancer, infection, everything has to do with one or the other slime in our body or slime-like substance in our body. And then all those ecosystems, all those habitats. I mean, the sea is a slime soup, but there's even an important slime in the desert. So where do you even begin? And I had those, there were, one after the other of those aspects came out. And it was to me, it's impossible that there aren't slime books out there already. I mean, it was a lot of work, like the biggest puzzle ever. But there was no secret knowledge or no secret study or no access to someone who hadn't talked before, It was out there, just spread, different names, many pseudonyms of slime. And from time to time, I did another search, Google slime books on, ooze, or maybe there's another English word that I don't know for slime, and everyone else knows it, and there are like 10 books on that stuff.
The goo books. Yeah,
it's like, because why isn't that better known? And I think it's like the perfect storm of people being so disgusted. I mean, I have to say that I had friends when I told them I'm writing a book on slime, even the word grossed them out. I couldn't tell them what the whole thing was about because they heard slime and that conversation is over now. I have relatives who haven't read the book yet because they can't bring themselves to crack it open. Any other book written by me, but not that topic. And the craziest thing, really, there were apparently a lot of, unfortunately, a big number of booksellers in Germany who refused to stock the book.
Really?
Because, they said the topic was too disgusting. Not the book, the topic.
Wow.
So I think everything came together. It's not apparent because slime has so many names, and research is just catching up with the stuff, and people are so disgusted by it. I mean, it's completely over the top. So it's like still, a well-kept secret, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I think about it, and we've covered a lot of ground. Obviously, there's so much more to the book that we haven't covered. Before we start to kind of wind down, I always close with the same two questions for my guests. But before we get to them, I'm just curious, is there anything that you came across as you were doing your research for the book that either just like really surprised you or you found just incredibly charming or interesting, kind of like a wow discovery that you want to make sure that we talk about today?
Probably how sophisticated slimes can be,
Ah,
especially in the sea. I mean,
okay.
if you're in a watery environment, of course you can just go crazy with slime, and animals do, marine animals do, and they have all these slime that like it's fishing rods with slime and just catching food. And the females at the same time catching sperm packages that the mates just release, like worm snails do that. Or slime nets and slime conveyor belts, or maybe even a slime layer covering the whole body in slimes and catching food that's drifting around. And then just, moving it to your mouth, stuff like that. And at the same time, how sophisticated those slimes are. I mean, all those animals that catch the food with slime, they can choose what they catch. It's not like if you think of slime, or at least for me, still it's like this amorphous substance. And thinking of a slime net is like you just grab with it, or everything will stick with it, right? But it seems that this is still like a net, like a sophisticated net. Not everything sticks in there. And there are animals that I think we only see now because some researchers have come up with methods with laser light to show those often transparent slime structures, and their mucus houses really crazy animals that look like tadpoles and that surround themselves with mucus houses. And they have all those different chambers where they filter food in there. I mean, that's just, how do you do that in water with stiff water? That's just so crazy to me. And that surprised me. And it's still surprising. I mean, there are every day there's another story, how complex these things are.
So cool. I gotta ask, how did you decide on the cover art, or did you have much to do with that? I think these are little like baby snails on the cover of the book.
No, in that case, I just saw it and I loved it because in the end, I always come back to snails. We started our conversation with the snail trails, and if I had to pick one slime animal, that's my favorite, I would still say snails. Maybe because just we know so much more about them. I mean, it's not only that these trails are like contact ads where males find females, but there are other carnivorous snails that can read slime trails and know this is a prey snail that went there, and this is a mating partner. Stuff like that. And others use it as an external memory. They find their way back home via their own trails. And there's even one limpet in California that grows algae on its own slime, like a gardener, and feeds on that. I mean, this is just mind blowing.
I love it. So cool. Well, listen, Susanne, at the end of my show, I have different people from all different walks of life on Talk Nerdy to talk about their research, their writing, their journalism, always with a keen interest in science. And I like to close my show by asking them all the exact same two questions because I'm always fascinated by the similarities and the wild differences in their answers. So they're kind of big picture questions, take obviously as much time as you need, but here we go. I'm curious. When you think about the future in whatever context is relevant for you right now, so this could be personal, it could be in your community, it could be national, it could be global, it could even be cosmic. First, I'd like to know, what is the thing that's keeping you up the most at night? The thing that you're most concerned about? Maybe you're even struggling with some pessimism or cynicism. And then on the flip side of that, so that we end on a slightly more positive note, where are you finding your hope, your optimism? What are you kind of genuinely looking forward to when you think about the future?
Yeah, boring answer. It really comes down to slime, I have to say.
I love that. Oh my gosh, tell me.
What keeps me up at night, or what I found scary while researching the book, was the stuff we don't know. like I said, it's all been out there. I probably, as far as I'm aware, wrote the first book on slime. But yeah, that stuff was out there already. So why haven't we seen that before? Why didn't we know that before? And so I'm still working. I mean, I've been busy with slime for, I think, 6 or 7 years now. Obviously, even with researching the book, and I came out in Germany, then in the UK, now in the US. So slime, yeah, it's been a few slime-filled years. But to moving on from slime, I thought about what else could be there that we don't see because maybe we don't want to see it. So I'm writing now a lot about parasites, for example. And it's hard to say who has the worst image, slime or parasites. But again, parasites make up at least half of all animal species, probably much more. So in a sense, being a parasite is more the norm than the exception. And they're really incredibly important in their food webs, in the ecosystems. But still, because we don't like them, we want to get rid of them. And they're really threatened, many of them, by the climate crisis and loss of biodiversity. Obviously, if like a host species dies out, then all the parasites probably will die out as well. Or snakes. I write a lot about snakes. Same problem. Maybe it's not so much disgust, but fear that we just don't see these animals and these biological phenomena for what they are. And that often keeps me up at night. What is it that we don't see? Where are the blind spots? And I think now that we have a completely distorted view of nature, just birds and butterflies and humans and ladybugs, yeah,
right, and maybe some fuzzy mammals.
Yeah, exactly. And then it obviously that has real life consequences. That if you look how money for conservation efforts are being spent, it mostly goes to mammals and birds, vertebrates, maybe a reptile here and there, but never to invertebrates. But invertebrates, I don't know, is it like 98% of all animal species? How can we ignore them just because they're not fussy and cute? I mean, for the millions we spend on just getting pandas to ponder the idea to ever mate again, you could save a lot of species that are probably more important than pandas. I mean, I love pandas. They're cute. But one biologist told me that they've been on the path to extinction all by themselves for a really long time. And all those soil organisms that we have no idea who they are, how they function, but yes, they keep our soils fertile, stuff like that. The pollinators, not just honeybees, all the pollinators, all those creepy, crawly, slimy, seemingly disgusting creatures,
which are so fundamental to our biodiversity.
Absolutely, and we don't really know, very often don't know much about them. We don't try to say, because we don't know about them. I mean, it's the same with slime. What's the only way to make people less disgusted by slime? Giving them my book to read, because once you know about stuff, you will always become fascinated. That's 100%. Just how it works.
Yeah.
And what gives me hope on the other hand is often also slime, because that material that's so soft seems to give in, but in the end gets its ways. I mean, that like one example, if you think about barriers, we of course we think of walls and strong structures, very forbidding, right? Or our own barriers, the skin, which is really, it's not impenetrable, but it's really complex, and usually it's a dense barrier. Right. And then if you think about slime, it seems so weak, but that's a barrier on the inside. And it has to, if you look at the colon, the mucus there has to keep pathogens and parasites out, but let nutrients in, and at the same time accommodate trillions of beneficial microbiota that we want to have in our body and to help us. And they live in the slime, in that barrier that at the same time keeps other microbes out. So that soft material that dries out so easily, that's really just water, is so capable. and I think that, yeah, it gave me a new perspective, not to see something as perfect if it's tailor-made for one function, but more to appreciate slime and slime-like substances. They can change their behavior. It's uncanny at first, but then you see that it's much more flexible in the sense that we have to become like that, not bully our way through nature, but find a new way.
Absolutely. Well, I've learned so much taking this time to speak with you. I'm so excited about slime. I hope everybody picks up a copy of Slime, A Natural History. Susanne, thank you so much for spending this time with us today.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.